Today's guest is Gary Rockis. He's an award-winning author of electronic and smart home books for workforce development. So Gary, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this evening.
Yeah, you have a diverse background, so I'm looking forward to sort of exploring it. But the first thing I noticed is you start out in the electrical area, but not in the usual way.
No, not really. It was kind of interesting. As a teacher, you don't always make the big bucks. So I wanted to find some way in which to supplement my income. And because I was interested in doing some of the electrical work, people wanted antique lights rewired. They wanted special lighting in certain places. And back, I'm 75. So if you go back 45 years ago, things were a little bit different and the codes and that weren't quite as tight. So you could operate. And quite honestly, my union friends said, please do it. We don't have time to do it and we don't want to do it. So that led me into interesting relationships with a lot of key people in the town and established a little higher social order, I guess.
Essentially, you're taking, jobs that no one wanted, but they were custom and unique. So you were able to use that to network with very influential people.
Yes, and I took skills that other people had, but they could make money doing other things. So they were more than complimentary to say, "Hey, please do this for me. It doesn't affect my income. In fact, it allows me to do my work better and satisfy my customer, which is always the important thing: is to satisfy your customer." And it helped my income stream too.
Yeah, for sure. And then you, I guess, made your way into, I guess some training and publishing. Is that correct?
Well, that again, there's kind of a unique path. I have friends that say I fall into things that come out smelling like a rose, but uh, it just happened. I was teaching at the high school level, and Illinois and the nation decided to develop vocational education, which we can get in a whole topic about that because I think we've lost sight of that today. But anyway, I taught at the high school, and people liked what I was doing. I did a typical shop, but I also did some of the technology. And the vocational school was being formed, and the ag teacher became the director and said, "Look, I want you to be a teacher there." I said, "Whoa." I said, "Yeah, this is industrial stuff." I said, "I'm pretty much in the residential." He said, "I've got an advisory committee who will advise you on what you need." And I said, "Well, I'll meet with him." But I said, he said, "Well, you know how to teach, you know how to educate. What you need to know is what to teach." I said, "Okay." So I went with them, and they took me around to the nuclear power plants. They took me through Caterpillar. They took me through the chemical plants. And I started seeing consistent pattern of here's what you need to know. And it wasn't the high end stuff. It was the fundamentals. You know, my electricians are working, put a plug on, do this, do that, do the work that they need as a fundamental skill, and we'll hire them. So I took their advice, and they helped me build these trainers. I was doing 220 3-phase motor controls, very sophisticated. I had a key to turn it off, so it was safety. Then we built alarm systems. We had a residential equipment, and they wired a house. So they were doing all these great fundamentals. I worked out a relationship with the Illinois University of Southern Illinois University. If they went through my 2-year course, they automatically got 16 hours college credit if they would go to a workshop. And then I brought the military in, I brought people in, and 95% of the students that went through my program ended up in some phase of electrical. So that ended up being very popular. And when I bought my equipment, I was very selective. And at that point, Bill and Ed DeVry had a business selling equipment. So I linked up with that group, worked with them. And at the end of about 3 or 4 years, I was getting people coming from all over the country to look at my program. I didn't think it was that unique, but it was what would need to be done. So then a publisher came in and said, "Hey, we like what you're doing. Would you like to write some material?" So I had gotten enough money from my little side jobs to take a year off and build a house and write a book. And it just happened that was the year that we adopted a 4-day-old baby with the wife going to work. But other than that, those are side trips. And so I went to work for this company toward the end of writing my book, and I was doing very well in sales. I sold like $300,000 worth of equipment. I'm thinking, wow, this is like 20% commission. I'm gonna pay off my house. I am set. I go to the guy and I say, look, I'm ready to come back to work. I got to tell him that I'm going to go teaching. He said, well, you better do that because I'm bankrupt. And I went, yeah, but I got all this equipment that's going to be delivered in September. And, well, I won't be in business by then. I said, I'll be right back. And literally, I went to my banker and I told him the situation. And I had this stuff all scribbled on paper. And I said, I think I can make something out of this. And they went, okay. And they lent me the $5,000 to get the guy through 2 months so I could collect the commissions. And within 2 years, I owned the company and built it into a 4-state, 14 employee, couple $1 million corporation selling technology to schools, not only my equipment, but we brought the first CAD stations in. In fact, I helped Autodesk launch their program. We brought the first CNC tables. We brought in the first, like I said, CAD, CNC, and robots. That led us to the Saturday Scholar at the Museum of Science and Industry. And we were talking about how industry was going to be automated, 30 years from now. And that turned out pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
So Gary, I mean, you're sitting there, your commission's on the line. At this point, I don't think you have any experience running companies. What made you think that you could do it? Like, what was in your head?
well, what I had been doing all the time that I was teaching, uh, people would come in and they'd ask me to do group presentations. So I'd go out and talk to them about what we're doing, and boy, we'd like to have that. We'd like to have that. So I kind of planted a seed that, I would really like to go out and do that, but I didn't have a company or anything. So all of a sudden, this other situation arrived, and I went, okay, how difficult can it be? I sell electrical equipment. I could do this. So I jumped in. I used, by the way, I used leverage my new house as leverage with the $5,000 loan and kind of went double or nothing. And I started working with the guy, and I just seemed to be able to learn because after about 3 or 4 months, I said, "Boy," I said, "I've learned a lot." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I didn't know anything." He said, "You learned so fast, I didn't know you didn't know." But the other thing I did, and I would encourage young entrepreneurs to do this, I did take one opportunity. They had a program going in Chicago where you could talk to an executive that had retired. And I've always used older people. I'm one of them now, but I used them for advice. And I had one of the Florsheim brothers, and he was giving me, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I said, that's all wonderful. I said, but you come from a family that's wealthy and obviously had the money to do it. And he looked at me and said, damn it. He said, I didn't take a penny from them. I did it all myself, and here's why I did it. I went, okay. All right, now I'm listening. And then I bought a book, and I think it's still out there. It's called The Greedy Bastard's Business Manual. And it was the best thing I've ever read because it was a guy who ran corporations, and he was not high and mighty. He said, if you're taking over a business, who opens the door? Who has the key to who closes it down at night? How to do a geometrical wizard of tax avoidance angles, how to own a banker and finance anything, how to do a soft bailout. It was just wonderful little chapters on practical advice. And I think that's something every entrepreneur should recognize. Without a good solid support system, you really are not going to go anywhere. So you want to make sure you have, quality people, whether it's in banking, your accounting, your clerical people, and get them involved in your company.
Yeah,
Um,
for
one of
sure.
the thing, one of the things I did, now I may be going off target here, but one of the things I was very successful at is that as my employees came on board, I took them out when we unloaded the truck at the school. I whether you're in accounting or whether you're secretarial, they went out and unloaded it. Then they saw the billing process, they saw everything was going. But the most exciting part, because we sold technology labs, where children ran to the labs and walked to everybody else's classroom. And I would take them there after about the 6th week, and I said, "Look through that window." And you seen kids excited in that. And I said, "That's what you do. That's your job." I think people need to understand what your company does and the impact it has and why they're an important part of that. And then quarterly, we'd get together and the salesman would talk to accounting, accounting would talk to other people, and they told their problems. I said, lay it out because she wants to help you because you need the help. And when she understands what you need, then you can get these problems solved. And it was just a very smooth operation. Now, it was a small company, but I think you can do that in larger groups and be successful.
Yeah.
So that's been kind of my game plan. Find smarter people than me, have them give me good advice, and then you actually use it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And you got into some real estate as well. That happened, I guess, after your company venture?
Well, again, that started a little bit when I started doing some of the electrical work for other people. And I bought one or two little houses and traded them up. And then I had a little apartment building. And I had a good friend by the name of Gene Funk. And he said, "Son, multiples, multiples." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Stay away from those single family dwellings. Get yourself a building with 8 or 10 tenants. Same roof, same electrical system, same plumbing, and you split the cost." Well, about 8 or 10 years later, a warehouse in our community came up, was 80,000 square foot building. And everybody said, "Boy, that's a dump." And I went by it every morning. And one day I was down in our small community with the mayor and the fire chief and a few folks. We were having a few, uh, well, let's just say we were socializing at the local pub. And I laughingly said, "I think I'm going to buy that and convert it into the Morris Business Technology Center. And I'm going to have all these companies come in and we're going to have an incubator and it'll be really great." I said, "In fact, it'll be so famous that when people come to town, they'll say, 'Where's McDonald's?' And I said, 'It'll be right next to the Morris Business Tech Center.'" And it was. But anyway, a couple days later, I got a call from these guys who were basically takeover artists, and they had bought it with the intention of selling off the inventory, and they did. They had 20 stores they liquidated, put on federal marshals, and they were not popular people. So I jokingly said, "Yeah, I'll buy it for a third of what you're asking." And interest rates were 18%. I got them down to 9. And the last thing that was really funny was that they weren't going to pay the realtor. So, and oh, before that, they said, "Well, we got to have some money down to show that you're sincere." And I said, "Okay, I'll give you $1,000." And they took it. And before I was all done, uh, the down payment was I paid the realtor. They gave me a loan, and then I paid on that for 2 years till I got a credit rating for it. And then I went to a bank and took it over. And now it's a very successful technology center with 52 tenants. So, like I said, I've been very fortunate to fall into and come out smelling like a rose. And
You know what? I know you say falling in, but there's more to this. I mean, have you ever reflected on what were some of the key things that you kind of do, maybe without thinking, that is kind of underlying that?
well, I've always, and my office manager always said, when I said my antennas were up, she goes, "You know something." And I did. I think I did risk evaluation very well, but I looked at opportunity, and what they say is, if you don't meet opportunity with an approach to do something about it, it passes. And this was something that just seemed right. And in fact, my daughter was about 8 at the time, and I'm walking her through this cold, dingy warehouse, and I laughingly said to her, I said, we could make this a skating rink, and the entire community could skate. And I said, what do you think? Should we buy it? And she went, go for it, Daddy. And I did. And everybody thought I was crazy or loon, but pretty soon I put this obelisk out front, first tenant, second tenant, third tenant, and it took off. And the town had lost many jobs. Interest rates were 19%. But as soon as I did that, all of a sudden the Kroger store that was gone was bought by other people, and they started developing it. There was a pill factory and Bass Pro Shop bought that. The town turned around economically within about 18 months, and I got businessman of the year that year for the community. So sometimes it's just your gut tells you it's the right thing. I ran the numbers. I mean, you can't go in totally insane, but I figured out that even if I bought this thing, it's setting between Colonel Sanders, McDonald's, and it's on the strip that's a major highway. It had to have land value in the future.
Sure.
Well, it took a while, but it did. And so I think the insight is to run your numbers, look at the opportunity, and then do something about it.
Yeah. And I
And
think, like you said, antennas up, being able to spot the opportunity because, you weren't the only one that was passing by this warehouse, right?
right,
Tons of people were going by it and then just, not seeing it. And you were just curious enough to, be able to explore it and follow through with it. And there's tons of these things around, right? If you're watching for it.
yeah. The other thing that was interesting was right next door was a restaurant, which was a disarray, and they were running it into the ground. And I heard it was up for sale. And I also heard that a car wash wanted to come to town. So I went to my bank and I said, I want to buy that restaurant. He went, you got to be kidding me. He said, that's a dump. I said, I know, but I said, it's going into bankruptcy, and I think I can get it for a good price. So I bought it, and 4 weeks later, I sold it to the car wash for what I paid for it and kept half of it for a parking lot. And, again, but the one thing you have to recognize, and I always do it, whether it's a bid or a job, what is the worst case scenario? You have to be prepared to take that. And if you're going double or nothing, it could be nothing. So it's great to be entrepreneurial. It's great, but run the numbers, look at the worst case scenario. And if that's the worst case scenario, and it looks good, go for it, daddy.
Yeah, well, you've published some books, a bit more technical, and then your new venture is you're going into the consumer or retail side of the education space. What was your thought here?
Well, it was interesting because the one thing I noticed, our book, Electric Motor Controls, about 30 years ago when I wrote it, it was based on what I had done in my classroom and about the motor controls and all that. And the kids were doing all this work, and I made these trainers. And so I wrote a book to support it, got a co author, it was very good. And I don't know, I had no idea how this happened, but the electrical union in Los Angeles and in Chicago got a copy of it. And probably my publisher sent it out to them. And they turned around and told the union they weren't going to use their material anymore. We're going with Rockis. And I was shocked. And they started buying thousands of copies. And over the last 25 years, we're in the seventh edition. And we've sold hundreds of thousands of books. The company's been in business 108 years, and this is the best seller they've ever had. So they've given me a little leeway to do a few things. And so I took my residential wiring book that I wrote in '76, and I added a section on smart home technology based on what I learned from industry. And if you look back on what happened, the PLC, program logic controller, which was really a computer, was dropped into the manufacturing facility. At that point, what changed the game wasn't the computers, but sensors. The fact that it could now begin to gather data that was impossible for a human being to do or process in the speed at which they could do it. So that was a core to our book, was sensors and then input, process, and output. If you look at a smart home, every device in that smart home is an input, a process, and an output. What makes the difference is the middle part, the process. You still talk to it, you still push a button, you still wave, but that may cause one thing to happen, which is to open a garage door. That's a smart device. Or you push a doorbell and a camera comes on, it does some other things. So, and the cost goes up the more process that takes place in between the input and the output. Thermostat being relatively simple, temperature, turn on the furnace. So when I finished the residential wiring book, I tried to promote that, but it was so heavy on the wiring that people didn't want to deal with it. So I said, go with me on this one. I want you to roll that off into another book and let me build on it and take it to the community because they need it. And I went to a couple of seminars with Google and all the head sheds talking about where the future was and this and that. And I'm sitting there thinking, guys, I know exactly what's going to happen. All these little industries out there are going to start building devices, and those are input devices that are going to control processes in the house. And then they're going to build those up, and you guys are going to come and buy them up. So I'm going to start now finding out who these guys are, what they're doing, what the underlying technology is, what the process is going to be in language, and then what the output's going to be. So that's when I started building that. And last year I brought it into final phase. But then I said, what makes difference? How my difference is I believe in graphics. I had dinner one night with Bill Nye, the science guy, after he did a really fantastic presentation. 800 kids were spellbound and silent as they watched his experiments. And we just talked a little bit, and he said, well, he said, I kind of go to third grade level. But he said, a lot of my audience, about 80% is adults. And I went, you know what? I've always written to the C student because if the average person can understand, A, B student just goes faster. So I've used that philosophy with the book, and I pretend that someone's near me. And what I do is my 50% of the book is illustrations. And if you read under each illustration, you could almost read the book. But then I said, I need more than just visual. So I said, QR codes. We use them in the grocery store. We use them for a lot of things. So I put in the first couple chapters, what is a smart bedroom? And I have an animation, and you put your phone over the book page, and it comes alive. Instead of little pop-ups, it's right there. And it goes, in a smart bedroom, we could do this, we could do this. If you have a child that may be deaf or blind, we can have a vibrating pillow. We can wake them up, and there's a blue light, so there's an intruder, there's a red light, there's a fire. And I try to get people comfortable with the terminology, whether they're looking to buy it. You need to talk the language.
Mm.
The biggest word in there is interoperability, which just means being able to communicate with each other, the components. And I tell people the other big word I know is delicatessen. And I came from a town of 500, and I didn't know what that was until I experienced it. So part of the book is experience it, begin to learn the terminology. So whether you want to do it yourself, hire it, buy it, you'll understand enough about what's going on to do an intelligent decision.
Sure. I
And
mean, in terms of the technologies that are coming into the home, which ones you think are going to have the most productivity um, sort of benefits associated with them.
Well, again, what I always look at is what is the need? For a lot of people, they're very comfortable with the security system. That they can walk away from the house and it tied into something. They like the doorbell. There's a sprinkler system that can be automated. So I think the first thing is what is it that you need. Also, I work with not a company, but an institute, Living in Place, um, that deals with aging and groups that are my age. What I'm losing abilities in certain things, and some have lost it faster. So look at everything from childhood to aging in place. What kinds of technology will help that group go forward? And like I said, you look at the bedroom, it's different. There's things you want there, some for comfort, maybe lighting that's soothing. Maybe when you go in the shower, you want lights and music. When you go in the bathroom or kitchen, if you've had problems with arthritis, maybe you want a faucet that's touch screen, and but touchless. So I really try to emphasize looking at each room. And at the end of each chapter, I say, go look smart bedrooms up, look at HGTV, smart home, and then write down at the end of each chapter what you want in your bedroom. Then what do you want in your bathroom? What do you want in your kitchen? What do you want outside? Then, is an individual process best? The garage door, yeah, you've been using it for years. Maybe you want to tie something in to tell you that it's open when you leave, or you want to be able to close it. Well, if that's important to you, then you add that. But the most important thing is to go through it all and understand what you want to do. Then make sure they all talk together. And so you can start out with a few, but if you start out with a few that are different and then you try to put them in a system, you might have to scrap that. So the whole book is really for the individual to make their own decisions,
Sure.
know the vocabulary, and then look at the situation. And it's going to make a large house, an apartment, rental. I deal with all that.
Yeah. I mean, um, with sort of the prevalence of work at home, remote work, and stuff like that, what are the most interesting technologies or integrations that you are looking at there?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with comfort, you know, and quiet. I think people are starting to look at noise suppression software, with kids running around, that type of thing. Lighting, I've been playing with that. I think the other thing is your temperature, uh, and how you might deal with one room versus the other. And there's a lot of adaptations that you can put into your system to allow you to shut off rooms or to cool one room more than another. I think it's environmental, uh, is the main thing that you want to look at. And the other thing that I do is I set little timers during the day. If I know that I've got workshop coming up or a Zoom call, I set something for half an hour beforehand so that even if I'm engrossed in writing, ding, oh, all right, then I can make the transition from finishing to going into the mindset for the next part. So I think again, it goes back to, what do you want to do? The other part of it is now you're bringing some pretty heavy duty equipment in. How do you want to energy manage that? Do
Mm,
you need it on all the time? There's a lot of devices that are ghost. Uh, they take current, and there's little devices you can buy now, a little plug, whether it's put into a power strip or just in the wall, plug your device in for 24 hours and monitor its current use. And you might say, my fish tank I got to keep on, but maybe my printer I can shut it off. And so energy management is a key part of it. Communication is a key part of it.
yeah. I mean, you're plugging everything to it. You're integrating it. I mean, is there any ideas? What are your ideas or thoughts on privacy or things like that?
Be a nice person. Don't screw around. It's going to catch you. Uh, it's a trade-off. It depends on your lifestyle. If you're a secret agent man, I think you probably want a little more security than most. But if you are, shopping and looking at things, if you want that information to be shared so that and they'll help focus you, that's good. I tell people, I said, Samsung and all those aren't making a smart refrigerator just to, impress you. Don't be surprised after a couple weeks if you're using Campbell's soup that you might not get coupons for a competitor or a new ketchup or something because they're gathering data. I mean, and while you're talking, I don't believe that they capture all that, but they do see patterns and algorithms that says, well, you looked at this the next day. I see there's an opportunity for that. So, again, I think you also have to be very careful in the dissemination of information. And I think that's more important for young families. I know my daughter is very careful not talking about when they're going on vacation, the first day of school, where and when, and those kind of things. But, they do share information, but with a guard around it. So that's a whole big area of concern. Another one is uh, radiation. There's a lot of controversy around the phone and your smart meter. And only thing I can say about that is, um, unfortunately, we have to worry, not worry, but we are getting information from our government as to some of the testing in that. And I think what I have found is that you can look at that information, but you also have to look at the practicality. If you've got that phone up here all the time, you're going to get whatever maximum radiation it puts out. I tend to use a speakerphone. As long as the quality's there, it seems to work. When it comes to a smart meter, you have to recognize it faces out, and generally there's a brick wall, there's a lot of stuff between it, and the radiation does not necessarily come inward, and it's usually somewhere where you're not anyway. So
Sure.
now walking outside and where the beams are and this and that, I mean, you can walk around with your I suppose you can find radiation with the Geiger counter, but uh, again, it's where you're at, what your concerns are, and then taking a logical approach to find out what's going to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. And what's obvious to me is, I think you mentioned maybe off air or earlier, you're 75. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I mean, it's obvious to me you've never stopped learning and constantly learning. So that's wonderful. Is there
I was
anything?
always the kid in the back of the room with this hand up. Hey, hey, what about?
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share?
No, I just think that education is so important. In fact, I'll just put a little plug in for my wife because we work together in education. We both have gotten the National Award of Merit for vocational technical education, and and I'll say her, is launching a program in the next few months called Grants Made Simple, and we're going to show teachers how to write $2,000 and $3,000 grants to get supplies and material into the classroom because we think that's really where it breaks down. The average teacher right now is spending $750 of their own money just to keep up with supplies. And we want to bring imagination and innovation back. We want to change one child's life in one classroom at a time. I'm sorry, I take that out of my, we're going to improve one child's life. We're not going to change it. It may change, but we're going to improve it and improve the classroom. That's that's the only thing I'd like to share. Is it's an ongoing process to educate people. So
Wonderful. Well, you mentioned before, always focus on why, right? Why you're
yeah,
doing something and the
right.
focus. So I love that, Jerry. I appreciate so much your various and interesting story. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for asking me, and I hope that it was informative, and I did have some fun.